All right, everybody, welcome back to the Ocean Institute Maritime Festival. We've had a great event so far. It's getting towards the end, and a little bit sad to see it coming to an end, but we're having a great time, and we're so happy to have so many great partners that have joined us throughout the entire festival. Right now, we're going to be joined in San Francisco at the San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park. And we're going to be joined by Park Ranger Chris Edwards, who's going to give us a tour of the Balclutha. But we wanted to say thank you to all the sponsors and a big thank you to all of the first responders and firefighters that are helping us here in California. We truly appreciate everything that you guys do to help keep us safe, and we wish you the best of luck, and please stay safe. Chris, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to let you take it away and take us on a tour.
All right, well, thank you very much. So my name is Chris Edwards. I'm one of the park rangers here, and I am joined on the camera by Ranger David Pelfrey. We're also getting some assistance from Ranger Robert Jaquette, so there's three of us here. And we do work here at San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park. Today, we are on the historic sailing cargo ship Balclutha. And so what I think I'll have David on the camera do first is kind of pan around to give you an idea of our setting and the ship itself. So a little bit of aquatic park where we're located here right near Ghirardelli Square. And honestly, right there, that's where the Golden Gate Bridge is. But because of the smoke in the entire region here, that's invisible today. Luckily, because we're on the ship, we should be able to capture that for you. So if David, would you mind tilting it up just a little bit? We'll capture some of the rigging to give them an idea of the setting that we're on and the historic ship that we have here. So looking up at the square rig here of Balclutha. And down a little bit lower here on the main deck level, you can see two doorways going in. That is from a structure added later in the ship's history. And just to sort of kick the tour off a little bit here, the ship's history is indeed quite long, starting back in 1886, where the ship was built in Scotland. This is a steel-hulled sailing cargo ship, and for the first 13 years of the ship's life, this was a British flagged cargo ship. But over its entire operational life, it did transition from British ownership to American ownership. And it ended up with a company called the Alaska Packers Association. And so that structure that you briefly saw off the camera in this direction was a structure that we call the shelter deck that was added in 1911. So pretty late in the ship's history. But the Alaska Packers added that to accommodate so many extra people, because with them, it wasn't just a cargo ship. This was also transporting a large workforce for the company. So as a cargo ship in 1886, when the ship was brand new, we're talking 30 crew members, usually less than that, but no more than 30 crew members. But under the Alaska Packers Association, we're talking around 200 or so people on board. And so that structure right back there was added to accommodate the fishermen. But what we wanted to provide you guys today and insight is one of the much lesser known stories, the untold story, underappreciated story, which is of the cannery workers. So we'll mention some more about the fishermen, but we wanted to introduce you to the experience of the cannery workers. We're going to go around here on the port side of the vessel and give you a look. So while the fishermen were back aft, the cannery workers were housed up forward. So if you'll follow us, we'll head up there right now and take a look. So just to give you an idea, as we're walking here, we are coming up the port side of the ship. To my right is a structure called the deck house. And on my left over here is the railing, although it's a solid railing, so it's known as a bulwark. But right up forward here, coming into view just now, you can see the forward end of the vessel. Specifically, those two wooden doors goes into a room that's called the forecastle, which would have been the crew's quarters, or at least it would have been during the early cargo ship days of the vessel. But when the vessel was owned by the Alaska Packers Association, things got changed around quite a bit. Certainly with the shelter deck back aft, but the cannery workers that lived up in the forward end of the ship were mainly down below deck. But this is one view of where the cannery workers would have generally called home, that we are really fortunate enough in that we have a historic photo that was taken on board from this exact location. So this will give you a really good idea of the cannery workers and the scene right up forward. So let me actually pick up the photo here, and I'm going to step up real close so that you all can see it specifically so that it fills the camera right here. Okay, so what you are looking at, there's some Cannery workers taking a meal. One thing that's still there is the forecastle head, this deck up there that you see in the background. You can't see the edge of the deck, the deck house here that I mentioned earlier, but you can see some temporary structures as well, like this structure here, which is most likely a temporary galley or a kitchen that would have prepared food for these folks. And the background right over here behind this gentleman is a structure that sits right on top of the forward cargo hatch. And that was the area that they had set in stairways so that you could get down below to where the cannery workers actually had their bunks and their living quarters. But this is the same exact location that we're standing right now. So this is definitely the before image, and this is the modern day image right here. Now, I haven't told you much yet about the Alaska Packers in general. Their history is rather long and complex, and we do want to focus in on the cannery workers. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take you down below deck now to show you where they actually lived and some exhibits that we have about the Alaska Packers. And as we go, I'll tell you a little bit about the Packers' history, but we really want to get you down below deck. So if you'll follow us, we'll head down there right now, but we have to go back in this direction to the main cargo hatch because the access is no longer through that forward hatch. But if you follow us, we'll head down right here. So we're coming back near the middle of the ship. I'm going to head down below first here. So I'm going down the main cargo hatch, down the hatch, right? And I'm walking down some stairways that some of you might be guessing is indeed a modern set of stairs. Now, right now, the camera's kind of pointed up because Ranger David is having to angle up to make sure his monopod doesn't catch into the stairs. But the stairs that we're all coming down are put in there because if you look straight ahead, here's the original way down here. So this is a ladder structure built directly into the ship. And if you take some time to think about it, it does actually make a lot of sense. As a cargo ship, you want your ladders to be straight up and down, not a stairway that's angled because that takes up a lot of space. You want your ladders vertical because they take up a lot less cargo space, which in today's world as a museum doesn't work very well for visitor access and safety. So we've got these modern stairways in place of the vertical ladders. So the stairways don't historically belong here, but as we walk around the corner, what you'll notice is that we got a really large exhibit down here. So this level is known as the tween deck, which is short for between. It splits the cargo space up into an upper level and a lower level down below, but it's all for cargo. And what we've done with the tween deck is we set it up to help people learn about all three major careers that this ship had. So we've got it set up so that everything here on the starboard side is examples of cargo that would have been heading out or outbound of San Francisco, and everything over on the port side of the cargoes that were coming inbound to San Francisco. So that's how we've set up the exhibit down here, but everything in this front part is the kind of cargoes that the Alaska Packers would have carried north to Alaska and south back to San Francisco. Now, as I mentioned up top side, the Alaska Packers have a very long and complex history. The short version is this, though, is that the Alaska Packers was a conglomerated fishing company. They would take everything they needed, supplies and their workforce, up to Alaska at the start of the salmon fishing season. They do all the fishing up there. They would run canneries on the beaches, the whole thing, their whole operation up there during the salmon season. And afterwards, they'd load the ship back up with all of their workers and all of their canned salmon and sail back south at the end of the season. And they had a whole fleet of ships to do this. Balclutha was one of those ships. This is one of the survivors. The other survivor is down today at a museum in San Diego, and that ship is the Star of India. Now, that particular name is important, the Star of India, because this ship had a very similar name. What the Alaska Packers did with their whole fleet of sailing ships is have a similar naming system. So you had the Star of India as one of their ships, And the Balclutha was renamed by the Packers as the Star of Alaska. So you had this whole naming system, and the whole fleet became known as the Star Fleet because of the naming system. And the whole fleet would do this job of taking all their supplies and people north and then bringing them all back along with the catch at the end of the season. So that's what we're all looking at right here. Let me show you something specific of what might be heading north. So I'm going to ask David to get up close here to take a look at some of the boxes. And you can see some of the labels, hopefully pretty clearly captures what they did with their business. I do need to point out that heading north, they wouldn't have these boxes built. It takes up a lot of space for just an empty box. So what you would normally see is have the boxes broken down into their shook form, predominantly heading north. And for the same reason, right here is 10, right, for construction of the cans that they would use once they got up north. But they don't want empty cans or empty boxes heading north because that's just wasting space. There's no fish caught yet. So they would take up the raw materials like the tin and the box shooks north, and then they would build them and make the cans once they got up there. Because otherwise they need room for all sorts of other supplies. Fish nets, fish traps, labels, or this machine right here, in fact, which is a fish gutting machine. So this is getting into some industrialized fishing here. And I do need to point something out. It's the label of this machine. Now, I do need to warn everybody, this machine and its official label, what was called back then, is indeed has a rather racist name. So I just need to prepare you guys for that. But it's right up here at the top. And hopefully that's coming across clearly on the camera. David, can you see it on the screen okay? Okay, so you can see the name right there. And I need to be honest with our whole audience. This is something we really, really struggled with. Should we put this label back on the machine or not? I mean, we were going to have the machine on display, but we really didn't know if it was the right choice to have that name on it or not because of its racist foundation. And so what the park eventually decided to do is connect with local Chinese groups, community groups, heritage groups. We connected with them and we involved them in this discussion. And the basic question being, should we have it on there or not? And kind of the consensus that came back from them was their recommendation that yes, it should be there. That's part of the history. We shouldn't shy away from the racist label of this machine. It is what they called it. We need to recognize it. We need to be able to come to terms with that. But that was their overall recommendation. Yes, they said we should label it and make sure we talk about the meaning of that as a racist label. So it was a really tough process for the park to go through, but we decided to bring in the Chinese population, the local community groups, to comment on it, and that was their suggestion to us. But I think in terms of walking around Balclutha today, that label is very important, especially when you're considering the people that worked as cannery workers. And when you're walking around this particular ship, that label is important to bear in mind when we go into their living quarters. If they're going to call a machine by this name, then how are they going to treat the cannery workers who predominantly at the time, early on, were Chinese, although later you saw Filipino, Japanese, people from Guam, African Americans, Mexicans later joined this group. But it started out as predominantly Chinese. But if they're going to call this machine by that name, how were they treated? So we're going to take you into their living space so you can appreciate what they went through. Follow me this way. So David's walking slowly here just to make sure that we maintain our good link through Zoom for you. But as he's walking up, I will point out just a few more things that he's passing by. You will find supplies like food. You'll find a boat like that one, kind of a utility boat. There's wooden pilings. There's also some fencing that they would use to construct fish traps. But it's right through this door where we go into the living quarters for the cannery workers. So David's going to come right up to the edge here. I'm going to step inside and give you a look. Okay. Now, first thing I want to do is point out that this is not the entire area. The Cannery workers' living quarters literally stretch from this side of the ship. I mean, there's a porthole right there, so we're close to the side of the ship here, but it stretched all the way over to the other side of the ship. And from this doorway, all the way nearly to the front of the ship. So it's actually quite a big area. This is just the best surviving part that we have here. But even right here, surrounding me, I've got 15 bunks. What I'm going to do is step up close to the camera again, because I actually have a printout that shows you the layout of this entire space. And you can see it is quite large. Okay, how's that coming across, David? Okay, so you can see that X right there with the highlight on it, that's where we are right now. But if you look up near the top, you can see some wording in there, and in the middle it says 73 berths or bunks. That's what a berth is. So in this entire area, you had 73 bunks crammed in, all down below deck. And I do need to emphasize below deck. When a ship like this puts to sea, for below deck space such as this, these portholes that are letting in this light that you're seeing me by right now, those portholes get closed. And that is for a safety reason. You want to seal up that porthole because you are below inside the ship itself. And if you get into heavy weather, you don't want water being able to flood in through a porthole like that. So when you start getting out to sea, these portholes get closed before you actually get out there. And so it gets really dark and stifling down here. And you can imagine what it was like with just these 15 bunks surrounding me. But 73 bunks total. You can imagine what it would be like to be crammed down below deck with no natural ventilation except for what's coming down the stairway. But you also need to appreciate how these people came to be here, not just the fact that they were, but how did they get here? And in many cases, it was a pretty desperate situation for these people, how they came to be employed in this job as a cannery worker. And again, this is something I really hope that you can visit the park yourself to understand the full story of this, because it is complex. In just the few minutes that we have with you folks today, we can't really tell you all the details. We can only tell you part of it. We just don't have the time. But by the mid to late 1920s, I can tell you how it kind of evolved. So if you were one of these groups such as Chinese, African American, Mexican, maybe fleeing either the Mexican Revolution or the chaotic aftermath of the revolution, if you were any of these groups, you might be desperate for whatever job you could find to survive. Coming into an area like San Francisco back then, however, it was not very easy. There were only certain jobs that society would allow you to have if you were not Caucasian. Cannery worker was one of those jobs. But by the mid to late 1920s, it had developed into something that today we would call debt peonage. And that's a complex term in and of itself, debt peonage. The short definition is that basically that means you're forced into debt. It's like an economic form of slavery. You are forced into debt just to be allowed to have a job like this. And in many cases, it's a debt that these people could never work off. So by the late 1920s, here's what you could expect if you were desperate for a job like this. You would have to know, first of all, where to go. In San Francisco, there was a store called Myers and Young Outfitting Shop, except it really wasn't much of an outfitting shop. If you were to walk in there, what you would see would be mainly empty shelves. But if you were to go to the person at the counter, because you have been told that's who you needed to talk to for a job, they might start signing you up. But it's not just to get you a job. It's that you were required to buy a suit of clothes from them. Now just ask yourself, a suit of clothes, and you're going to Alaska. Does that make sense? You are forced to buy the suit in order to be guaranteed the job, however. And in many cases, they just didn't have money to pay for it. So it was taken out of their future paycheck. So you can kind of see how this process is starting to work against these folks. They're forced in debt just for the suit of clothes, but it didn't end there. One item after another, right there in the store, then here on the ship, and up in Alaska, all these items that they might be desperately needing or required to buy, and it comes out of their future paycheck. In many cases, these people came back from the job owing the company money. But a suit of clothes was the starting point. This is what it would look like. And it was given to you only after you were on the ship. Now, this is a system that went on for quite a long time. Finally, this began to leak out, however. And one good example of how the story leaked out had to do with these college students, these Caucasian college students that just on the spur of the moment thought a cannery job sounded like a good summer job. They would get a job, they'd get a paycheck, they'd be able to travel a little bit. But as you might guess, once they got involved, this turned out to be something they were not expecting, something that they did not enjoy. But they were initially stuck on the ship. Now, the ship hadn't left San Francisco yet, but they were stuck on board the ship. A couple of them, though, jumped overboard, swam to a nearby dock, were able to get back up on the dock and went to the police. And the police responded. They came down to the docks, onto that ship, and retrieved their Caucasian friends and did nothing else. Nothing had changed, except for the fact that these college students experienced what they did and they began talking to people. And one of the people that heard about it was a guy named Max Stern. He was a reporter for a newspaper here in San Francisco. And he decided to do something that today would be called investigative journalism. He decided to sign up and go through the experience and then write about it. And again, this is a long story. The short version is that he went through a good portion of it and had just a hard time getting by day to day. Up in Alaska, fortunately, he was amazingly able to extract himself from his contract. And they said, get yourself home. And that was difficult to do because he was up in Alaska. But he did eventually able to get a ride back to San Francisco. And when he got here, he was able to start writing a whole series of articles that you might say, busted the story wide open. What I'd like to do to sort of wind this up is read you a short quote from one of those articles. And this is a quote that takes place right when he was signing up for that job. And they started talking about that suit of clothes that he was having to buy. So he had just gotten signed up and they were talking about the suit of clothes, but he was running short of cash. It's been around, it'd been a long day. He'd been spending a lot of his pocket money. He didn't have much left. So here's what he had to say. He said, having only a few dollars left, I suggested that I come back later to buy the outfit. He reassured me that the money for the outfit would come out of my wages and I didn't need the cash. The prices seemed pretty high, but I figured that the articles must be exceptionally good. I asked him where they were because I thought I'd like to see them before I bought. But he said, we'll send them to you on the boat. We don't have them here. I had to be satisfied. My bill totaled $62.75. It was a big one for a summer job that would only net me $170 at most. I learned that my bill was not exceptional in size. Most of them ranged from $20 to $60, but some went as high as $100. And that was only the start of his experience, which he was able to get himself out of when so many people were not able to do that. Now, I strongly urge you to keep your eye on our social media, keep your eye on our webpage. Due to the pandemic and other factors, we still are not quite open yet, but once we do reopen, this is just one of many stories that are underappreciated and kind of hidden away, untold stories. And they are very complex. You're able to come down when the park reopens. We really hope that you will explore them in full. In the meantime, we've got various virtual things that we're doing, such as this presentation today. But I've also got two Ranger colleagues that are going to be following up behind us, Ann and Sabrina, who will tell you about something that they're doing in a virtual sense to get the park stories out and about too. But we do hope that you've enjoyed this quick look into the cannery workers' experience and the part that the Star of Alaska, aka Balclutha, played a part in. And hopefully this was something new for you, and hopefully that you will explore more of in the future. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you guys very much. Not sure if there's any questions or if we got any time left that we might be able to show you one last little visual, but Otherwise, we hope you've enjoyed it. So I'm not sure at this point if there's any questions.
We've got 5 minutes left here, Chris. So I really appreciate everything. Thank you so much for the tour. For our guests, when you can, please pay them a visit. It's a really unique experience to just experience the Balclutha and everything they have in San Francisco. So if you get the opportunity, please do go up there. We're gonna end right now, actually, because we're gonna start another one with Chris's colleagues, Sabrina and Ann, in just a little bit, around 3:30. And we're going to talk about a podcast that they've come up, that they've made, which is absolutely amazing, called Better Lives, Bitter Lies. And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. So join us in about 4 minutes and we'll be on there. Chris, thank you so much for showing us around and being part of this event. We really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.